After 18 years of marriage, I had yet to gain a deeper understanding of my wife. I attributed this to my own shortcomings, as I had not made a concerted effort to do so. While we had a functional relationship, there was a lack of emotional intimacy. I had never viewed her as the love of my life, and I sensed that she felt similarly. However, we were compatible enough to have 3 teenage children. I was employed by a prominent automobile insurance company in a claims department. The position offered a competitive salary and comprehensive benefits, including retirement plans. We owned our own home, but the mortgage amount exceeded the current appraised value. My wife was a homemaker, and the house was always she was meticulous about maintaining a tidy home, ensuring that laundry was washed and ironed and that meals were prepared with precision. It is likely that her dedication to housework contributed to her maintaining a physique that was comparable to that which she had displayed during her high school years when we first met. Neither of us was particularly interested in pursuing higher education. We were married a year after I commenced my career. Noreen was eager to establish her independence and live apart from her parents. I desired regular sexual intercourse since we were comfortable with each other and appeared to be a compatible couple. Unfortunately, there was no intense, passionate, or romanticized bond between us. The sexual intimacy was consistently satisfactory, and I never perceived any significant issues, particularly in that regard. However, I was mistaken. It began at one of those unfortunate company events. I did not dance, nor did Noreen. I allowed her complete freedom of action, merely to ensure her distance from me. I spent the evening in the company of several other spouses who did not dance. Throughout the night, unmarried men entertained their wives and single companions on the dance floor. The only issue seemed to be that Noreen danced. Dirk Franklin was a proficient dancer and exhibited a penchant for philandering. On several occasions, I momentarily lost sight of Noreen, but she always reappeared. The evening was not particularly enjoyable for me, but I made the sacrifice so that my wife could experience a brief period of levity. After returning home, a few drinks had a considerable impact on her behavior in bed. The time spent at the party was more bearable as a result. On Monday morning at work, the experience was particularly enjoyable. It had a revitalizing effect. Initially, everything was fine, but then I began to notice some men looking in my direction and engaging in some giggling. I observed Dirk directing his attention in my direction and engaging in some light-hearted conversation with a female companion. I subsequently noticed Dirk casting glances in my direction and smiling, or perhaps more accurately, smirking. It is worth noting that Dirk and I do not have a close relationship. I have an unfavorable opinion of him, and I found his actions to be unwelcome. Just before lunch, I managed to speak with one of my most trusted colleagues. Barry, I must inquire as to the nature of the recent behavior exhibited by Dirk. If he continues to smile at me in such a manner, I will be forced to resort to physical violence. I am uncertain as to the veracity of the information I have received from John, but it appears that Dirk is boasting to others about his sexual encounter with Noreen on the previous Saturday night. This is highly implausible, as Noreen would never consent to such an act. However, he has managed to obtain a pair of her undergarments, which he displays to his male acquaintances and even permits them to smell them. It is difficult to comprehend how he could have obtained such a possession. It is difficult to comprehend, John. He asserts that she bestowed the garments upon him following their sexual encounter in one of the hotel conference rooms. Could you confirm whether this is indeed the case? The color he describes is silk gray or silver. I am grateful for your assistance in this matter. Please do not divulge any information to others. I am indebted to you for your discretion. If Barry had stated that the undergarments were red or black, I would have simply made a jest, but I was present when Noreen prepared for the party. She wore her preferred silver silk lingerie set, which I had procured for her as a gift on Valentine's Day. I had also purchased a bra and panties for her. On this particular day, approximately 20 minutes later, I observed Dirk heading towards the men's restroom. He had consumed a considerable amount of coffee that morning. I followed closely behind him. I am not inclined to engage in discussions of a confrontational nature. I was disinclined to confront Dirk directly and ask him to cease disseminating false information about my wife. This was due to the fact that I was uncertain as to the veracity of the information. If I were to confront him directly, it would likely alert him to my presence. I was keen to avoid this outcome. One potential solution to the problem would have been to strike his head against the tiled wall in front of the urinals. As I was a gentleman, I waited until he was finished and then punched him in the nose with my fist as soon as he turned around. Something slammed loudly and my shirt got blood on it. This annoyed me, so I punched him again as he bent over, clutching his nose. Dirk was a large man, but he did not resist and did not attempt to defend himself. I was unsure whether to attack him or not. I found some silk panties in his pocket and kicked him twice hard in the crotch area as I was leaving the bathroom. I noticed that he was vomiting. I left early for an early lunch, and when I returned, I learned that my employment with the company had been terminated. Dirk was taken to the hospital. It took them less than 20 minutes to finalize the checkout, and I was past it. Today was shopping day. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Noreen pulled into the garage. I looked up as she entered the kitchen with several bags of groceries. "What are you doing home in the middle of the day, honey? Are you sick?" I did not answer, and she set the plastic bags on the countertop. "Would you like to help me bring in the rest of the stuff?" I remained silent, and she returned to the garage. She returned with 6 more bags, but without saying anything, she set them on the edge of the table. "Is something wrong, John?" "I can tell you that. Why are you home?" Saying this, she began to sort through the bags. "I've been fired." "That doesn't make sense. Why would they fire you?" I sat there trying to figure out how to start a conversation. "I'm not so sure about that," I finally replied. In the end, I just threw her panties across the table. Upon seeing them, Noreen sat up and grabbed her head with both hands. "Oh no," she moaned. "This can't be happening." I saw my wife begin to cry. It was neither a moan nor a. She began to wail, but the sound was somewhere between a wail and a cry. After my question, the crying seemed to intensify. She put her head down on the table, and I could hear her quiet mumbling over and over, "No, no, no, no." I waited patiently for almost a minute, and then my wife tried to wipe the tears from her face and looked at me. She said, "I'm sorry, John. I'm really sorry. It was a mistake. I drank too much and made a mistake." "You weren't that drunk. You knew exactly what you were doing. Did you not do so?" "John, you must believe me. It was an error in judgment. A grave error. There is no romantic involvement between me and Dirk. Honestly, I am truly sorry. If it was an error, why didn't you inform me at the time? I did not want you to discover this information. I did not want to cause you pain. If you did not intend for me to discover this, why would you engage in such behavior with the most garrulous individual in the company?" He promised he would not divulge this information to anyone. "Are you so naive as to believe this was an accident?" Morning, he allowed every male employee in the building to discover the evidence. "Why did you allow him to take possession of the items in question?" "I did not permit him to take them, I provided them to him so that he could discard them. I utilized them, and I was unable to return them to their original state." "Why did you use $30 panties to clean yourself up, John?" "I am sorry for the inconvenience. Should I have remained unaware of the incident, or should you not have engaged in the act? Both outcomes are unsatisfactory. I have caused you significant distress, John. What should I say to rectify the situation?" One might be forgiven for assuming that the expectation would be for me to say that I forgive you. However, this is not the case. Instead, I would like to hear a reason as to why you did it. I am not convinced by the excuse that you were drunk. I do not believe that I am alone in this opinion. I do not accept that I was that drunk. Dirk and I had a good time all night. He is a good dancer and a very funny man. He knows just the right thing to say to a girl, something that makes you feel good. Therefore, it is likely that you two just wandered into one of those empty conference rooms and made mad passionate. That is not the sequence of events that transpired. Could you elucidate the circumstances surrounding this occurrence? I am reluctant to engage in further discourse on this matter. It required a greater length of time for me to cleanse myself. This is precisely the reason for my availability to you, is it not? Could you clarify the initial action you took upon our return home? Noreen, could you please reiterate the instructions you provided during our time in the bedroom? I must respectfully disagree with your interpretation of events. I am genuinely remorseful for my actions, but I do not perceive them in the same light. John, you. He is making a fuss over this. It was not a significant event. We can overcome this together, Norrin. Do you truly believe it was inconsequential? I lost my job, my pension, my wife, and my children. You may not view it as a major incident, but it was a significant event for me. My wife simply sat there and observed me as I stood up from my chair. I must leave now. The police will likely arrive shortly. I am not interested in speaking with them at this time. Why are the police coming? What other developments have occurred, John? I regret to inform you that I offended your romantic partner when I returned your undergarments. This indiscretion resulted in my termination from employment. I believe the police have already interviewed Dirk. I would be willing to serve a brief jail sentence merely to have the opportunity to engage in sexual intercourse with you. I am at a loss as to my next steps. I am uncertain about my future plans. While you were shopping, I loaded my belongings into my vehicle. I will contact you at a later time. She appeared to be on the verge of tears. I turned around before leaving the room to avoid any further emotional distress. I reserve the right to be informed about the circumstances by you, should you choose to mislead or distort the truth. I can guarantee that such actions will have consequences. I had sufficient funds in my account to last at least 6 months before leaving town. I paid off all my credit cards and cancelled them. She could spend the money as she saw fit, or was forced to do so, but I did not want to deplete my resources. I was certain that she would provide for the children, as they would soon be out of school for the summer. I was unsure, however, whether this would ease or complicate Norrin's situation. I was similarly uncertain about my plans when the money ran out. Furthermore, I was unsure whether I would be eligible for unemployment benefits, given that I had been laid off for justifiable reasons. On the first night I stayed at my brother's house, he had a small apartment in Shillhaven and was more than willing to provide me with temporary accommodation until I found something more permanent. The following day, I moved into a small furnished one-bedroom apartment that included utilities. There was even cable to connect to the internet, as I had left the house without turning my phone on. I did not feel inclined to answer the phone, but I was aware that I would have to do so at some point. I would inevitably have to interact with the children at some point. Collaborating with Robbie was straightforward, yet not particularly gratifying. The other 3 men were adept at climbing trees and harvesting cherries, as well as removing stumps. My role was to assist them. They appeared to value my efforts and were eager to impart their knowledge and expertise. I was preoccupied and attempted to disregard the issue with Norrin. I was certain that I would file for divorce as soon as possible. Terry was my eldest daughter. She was intelligent and kind. She was graduating from high school in 2 months and enrolling in dental technician classes at the local college. Brian was preparing to join the Marines as soon as she was scheduled to graduate the following year and had 2 additional years of schooling remaining. Her primary objective was to marry and have children. She had previously aspired to become a teacher, but it seems that she had outgrown that ambition. They were all well-behaved children. Brian frequently traversed the neighborhood because he believed that doing so would enhance his resilience for a career in the military. Terry was employed as a candy salesperson at one of I am uncertain about the local hospitals, but I believe that Twitter was invented by S. If she did not invent it, she certainly perfected it. The only contact I had with any of the children was through Terry. I did not feel comfortable discussing family problems with S because she was too young, and Brian did not want to talk about it at all after I left. The group was informed of the circumstances surrounding my departure, and it would seem that no information was withheld. Brian promptly excused himself from the room and did not communicate with his mother again. S remained in the room and became visibly distressed. Terry was the only one of the 3 who was willing to engage in a discussion about the dissolution of the marriage. Norrin declined to provide Terry with an explanation of the circumstances that led to the separation. Instead, Terry discussed the matter without providing any detailed information. Following the filing of divorce papers, Terry informed me that their mother had begun leaving the house in the evenings on a regular basis. She typically returned home in an inebriated state. Terry stated that this behavior commenced shortly after the divorce proceedings commenced. The children attempted to avoid contact with Noreen, yet her actions still had a detrimental impact on the family unit, according to Terry's understanding. There was no male involvement. Brian refused to communicate with his mother and whined frequently. Terry was the only individual who interacted with Noreen, and those interactions were typically limited. I found the situation disagreeable, but as long as Noreen did not bring any male companions home, I did not feel compelled to inquire further. 1 week later, the situation deteriorated significantly. I was at work with Josh and Jimmy, 2 climbers. At the summit, I was engaged in the process of cutting branches while I was working at the base of the mountain, feeding the branches into the chipper. Things seemed to be going relatively well until I was approached by 2 men who had driven up in a Dodge vehicle. It was not uncommon for people to engage in conversation with us while we were working. They were typically interested in learning about our work and the rates we charged. I always made sure to have a supply of Robbie's business cards on hand for such occasions. I had placed a business card in my shirt pocket for such occasions. As I was holding out a business card to one of the visitors, the second of them gave me a hard punch in the temple. It was an unexpected and deliberate action, resulting in the injury he had sought to inflict. I was on all fours, attempting to regain consciousness, when they began stomping on me with their boots. There was no time to consider a plan of action or take any defensive action. The assailants were able to successfully immobilize me before I was able to fully comprehend the situation. The best I could do was curl up and attempt to minimize the damage. The duration of the attack is unclear, but it ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Josh attempted to persuade me to sit up, and I strained my vision as much as possible and observed Jimmy engaged in a telephone conversation on his mobile phone while the Dodge vehicle departed the scene. I was experiencing significant discomfort. The most distressing aspect of this ordeal was the inability to breathe. With each inhalation, a sharp pain radiated through my right side, indicating the presence of a fractured rib. This was my first experience with such an injury. At that moment, I became aware of the larger of the 2 assailants lying on the ground adjacent to me. His head had sustained significant trauma, resulting in a profuse bleeding. Jimmy and Josh swiftly discerned the situation and endeavored to assist me. Josh then proceeded to expedite the process by lowering his chainsaw, which was secured by a safety rope, and swinging it at the assailants who were kicking me. The steel chainsaw, which was suspended from the chainsaw's chain, struck the larger of the 2 assailants in the head, resulting in the loss of his ear. His companion, exhibiting no hesitation, promptly departed from the scene, despite the fact that the chainsaw was not fully operational. The attack resulted in a significant laceration on the assailant's head. After a few minutes, he began to move. Jimmy then administered a forceful kick to the man's testicles. With the exception of a single blow to the head, all the damage was inflicted upon my own body. I remained stationary until the arrival of the ambulance crew. I declined to ride in the same ambulance with the assailant, and thus the local police transported him in the back of the patrol car. Upon arrival at the hospital, I observed that the larger individual had sustained a significant laceration on the side of his head. While his ear had not been completely severed, the injury was extensive. Despite my initial sense of well-being, the attending physician and Robbie recommended that I remain overnight for observation. Law enforcement personnel had apprehended the second individual in the Dodge vehicle before he had traveled a mere 10 kilometers following his meal. I retired for the evening, but my rest was brief. It was nearly 1, the time was 12 a.m. When my cell phone rang, I was initially perplexed by the late hour and the caller's identity. However, I was soon prompted to respond to the urgent plea from Terry. Despite my initial reservations about the suitability of my assistance at such a late hour, I was compelled to offer my support. The caller proceeded to inform me of the circumstances surrounding Terry's mother, who had been incarcerated following a vehicular accident and subsequent arrest for driving under the influence. I was then prompted to inquire about the well-being of Terry's mother. The caller reassured me that she was not seriously injured, although the vehicle had sustained significant damage. The vehicle then collided with a fire hydrant, resulting in significant damage to 6 parked cars. Was the driver alone? I am uncertain. The driver will not be released until a bond or bail is posted. I was unsure of what else to do, so I called you. Terry, we have a problem. I am not at home. I am at Pottsville Memorial Hospital. I was injured at work today and the doctor wanted to keep me overnight. I am fine, but I cannot leave. Perhaps you should call your Aunt Sarah. She would probably be willing to help. Please assist your mother. What is the nature of her condition? I am currently hospitalized due to a rib fracture that has been stabilized with a cast. I am uncertain if I will be able to operate a motor vehicle in the near future. I will recover, so there is no need for concern. I require a few days of rest. I did inform your mother of the circumstances surrounding the accident. She is currently experiencing a multitude of challenges. Is there anything I can do for you? I am interested in learning more about the incident that befell your mother. I will contact you tomorrow. In the afternoon, I observed the situation and noted the developments. Robbie transported me to my apartment and placed some microwavable food in the freezer. I requested that he purchase a couple of 6-packs of beer, but he only procured some Coke. I was able to move at a sufficient pace to utilize the bathroom and feed myself. Regrettably, I was compelled to view the Adam Sandler Film Festival for the entirety of the day. Shortly before dusk, Terry contacted Noreen, who was socializing with individuals who were employed at my former company. I found this development intriguing, given that I no longer had any professional ties with them. Given that I had no further contact with the company, I was unaware that she had any colleagues who remained there. They were just beginning to enjoy themselves when the police arrived and arrested Dirk. Noreen became visibly distressed and began consuming more alcohol than she normally would have done before closing time. She refused to call a cab and instead asked for assistance from others. Terry was unable to ascertain the reason for Dirk's arrest and the subsequent emotional response from Noreen. We conversed for a few more minutes, during which Terry expressed relief at my return home and the potential for further communication. They wanted to come over to my place, but they didn't have a car. Sarah had bailed my wife out, but Noreen hadn't come home. Terry gave me Sarah's cell phone number. Sarah, it's John. What is going on? Your wife is in a state. John, it is your fault. Oh, wait a minute. Sarah, how is this my fault? You left her. You left her with 3 kids and just ran away. Who do you think you are? Come on, Sarah. You know me better than that. Why would I just one morning, I terminated my employment, abandoned my wife and children, and departed? Does this sequence of events appear logical to you? Noreen asserted that I was terminated from my position and that I was directing my frustrations towards her. Did she indicate the reason for my termination? She stated that I assaulted an individual at work because I danced with her at a company gathering. Sarah, I did not assault the individual. She informed me that she had engaged in sexual intercourse with him at the gathering. She did not inform me of this incident. I did not assault the individual because he was dancing with your sister. I struck him because he had engaged in sexual intercourse with her and then boasted about it to the entire company. She even presented him with her underwear as a token of her appreciation. There was no response on the other end of the line. Did she inquire about the reason for her boyfriend's arrest the previous night? No, but she did imply that I was somehow involved. Our conversation was abruptly terminated by a knock on the apartment door. Sarah, I must take my leave. I will contact you tomorrow. The police officer who arrived at my door was an unpleasant individual, and he was also my brother. Please, come in, Toby. It is always a pleasure to see family. Of course, I would be delighted to offer you a beer. The individual in question is Dirk Franklin. I assume you are aware of him. He was engaged in an altercation with Noreen. I attempted to persuade him to cease his actions, but he was not receptive. He has admitted to all the charges against him, therefore a trial will not be necessary. The judge will sentence him and his 2 accomplices on Friday. I am uncertain, but I believe he will receive a sentence of 2 to 3 years is likely the sentence which will be served in the county jail. This is a favorable outcome. Toby could not resist a chuckle. You intend to exact revenge, is that correct, John? I am seeking assistance from a few friends. You do not intend to cause me any trouble, do you? It seems you have volunteered to help. That is one way to put it. I must go now. I would like to speak with this individual, who will be held at the city jail until sentencing. I will visit tomorrow morning. How is Sally? I would also like to inquire about the status of my sister. I believe the roles may have been reversed, with Sally providing the greater support. The most challenging aspect of reaching the police station was navigating the vehicle. I was uncertain which was more distressing, being restrained or the journey itself. It was as though I were a mummy or unable to bend over when I entered the room. A wide grin was shining on Dirk's face. It appeared as though I were a little sore. "Mr. Esterly, did you trip over a tree branch?" He seemed to like the grimace on my face as I sat up. "Welcome to Schuylkill County, Dirk. This is my territory and I will ensure that you enjoy yourself while you are here." "You're here?" "I don't think so. I'm departing on Friday." "Was it worth it?" "It seems you've been injured and unemployed." "Was it worth it to you?" I didn't understand the question. "I never did anything to you that you didn't deserve. You should have just left it alone." "I was better." "I believe that, at the time, you and I were both of the same opinion. My wife, too, seemed to think so. However, she is now yours to dispose of as you see fit. I am sure that you will enjoy her. Indeed, I have enjoyed her on 3 occasions since you left. On one occasion, she was in your bed while the children were at school. You really annoyed her when you served her with divorce papers. He did everything he could to annoy her. If the judge decides to sentence him to time in a state prison, it will be more challenging for me to repay him. The district attorney's office was located on the 3rd floor, and the old courthouse did not have an elevator, which was not accessible for individuals with disabilities. It seems that one of the charitable organizations should have addressed this by now. John Esterly, I understand you have returned to the area. Elizabeth Vargas was the top-performing student in our class. She received a full scholarship to Pennsylvania State University and subsequently obtained her law degree. She married the captain of the soccer team, who was the only male student in our class to attend the U.S. Air Force Academy. They were an exemplary couple, with the exception of the unfortunate demise of Captain Philip Vargas in a vehicular accident. Following the unfortunate incident that befell her some 10 years ago, the subsequent 5 minutes were spent engaged in reminiscences of the halcyon days. I found myself somewhat at a loss for words, as I perceived her to be a member of an elite social circle, whereas I was regarded as a mere minor player. I smiled and attempted to maintain a polite demeanor, seeking a graceful means of extrication. "It was a pleasant experience conversing with you, Elizabeth. I have recently returned to this city. I had heard that you were working here, and I simply wished to extend a greeting accompanied by an embarrassed smile." I then rose to take my leave. "Please, sit down, John. The polite chit-chat is over. You are here about Dirk Franklin, are you not?" "Yes, but when I saw you here, I decided it was not a particularly good idea. I felt like a beached whale attempting to return to the water. I have been assigned this case. John, I have a general understanding of the situation. It is evident that he will be incarcerated. What is the purpose of our meeting?" "I believe that is sufficient. I simply wish to ensure that he received the appropriate consequence." Elizabeth Vargas leaned back in her chair and smiled at me. It was somewhat amusing because, at CU, one typically imagines that it will be the larger, more intimidating individuals who engage in such behavior. I was irritated by John's behavior. I found myself rubbing my fingers together and looking down at the floor. I was uneasy discussing this issue with a woman, particularly one like Elizabeth. She was not going to let this matter rest. I had been severely harmed by Dirk Franklin. I lost my job, my wife, and my children because of him. I was simply trying to while incarceration is not a vacation, it is not a vacation stay. The question is whether he should be kept in the county or sent to the estate. I have no choice in the matter. I cannot keep him in county jail for more than 2 years. If I do, I will be forced to send him to one of the state facilities. She noticed I was smiling. I believe that 2 years here would be sufficient with some effort. I stood up. Once more, she did not impede my progress, but upon my turn, she inquired if I would be amenable to meeting her for lunch at Scripps around at noon. I nodded, and upon offering her a slight smile, she reciprocated. The prospect of an engaging lunch seemed promising. After my departure from the courthouse, I engaged in some retail therapy, procuring a tasteful shirt and some new trousers. I also procured work attire and a case of beer. I resolved that, should I be compelled to choose between pharmaceuticals and beer would prevail. I was uncertain as to whether the lunch would be of a business or pleasure nature. It proved to be the latter. Elizabeth returned to her residence following the demise of Philip. It transpired that she was in receipt of a government-sponsored compensation, yet still required gainful employment. She was employed in a position that paid an annual salary of $16,000. Elizabeth had a son, Philip Jr., who was 1 year old when he was born. They decided not to name him Junior or Philly and instead chose the name Second. Obtaining personal information from her was challenging without appearing overly curious, so I simply allowed her to share what she felt was appropriate. I did not discuss my own situation, as I was concerned about being perceived as a weak individual. My esteem was somewhat low at the time, so I was in dire need of protection before Elizabeth left to resume her employment. She informed me that I should not concern myself with the upcoming sentencing. However, upon my return home, I observed that my 3 children were present on the porch with their suitcases and travel bags. I was perplexed by their unexpected appearance and demanded an explanation. No one offered a response. Brian then initiated a conversation by disclosing the address. I was further astonished to observe that there was no vehicle present. How had they managed to reach my residence without a car? Aunt Sarah subsequently revealed that she had driven them there. We are here, but she couldn't stay. Brian stood up as I approached the porch. Could you get the case of beer out of the car, please? I'm having a hard time lifting it. Terry helped me into the house, which was unnecessary but understandable. Brian took the beer into the kitchen and made everyone cold ice cream. I was unsure how long they'd been there before I got back and just why Aunt Sarah brought you all here. She said it was the best thing to do under the circumstances. Brian kept. In response to my inquiries, Brian provided answers, yet I remained uncertain about the specifics. I took a large sip of soda, contemplating whether I should have purchased a cold beer instead of a warm one. When pressed, Brian declined to elaborate on the circumstances. The 3 of them sat in silence, exchanging glances. Finally, Terry spoke up, recounting that a few days prior, he had returned home from school to find his mother engaged in sexual intercourse with an unidentified male in my bedroom. I was taken aback by the revelation. It was unclear whether Terry was aware of the identity of the individual in question. I considered directly inquiring, but something prevented me from doing so. She was unaware of his name, but she stated that it was a male colleague. I observed my youngest daughter, inquiring as to her actions. I observed the act for a brief period. I have previously viewed sexual intercourse on the internet, but this experience was distinct. It was repulsive. I departed and returned to my studies. Did your mother know you were present? I do not believe so. She was lying with her eyes closed, appearing enraged. I threw an empty soda can across the room and it bounced around like a child's toy. Have you children had lunch yet? No, Terry. How about ordering us a couple of pizzas while the children were sorting out their belongings? The children were present and pizza was consumed as an early dinner. We conversed on a variety of topics for a period of time and then we all retired for the evening. I retired to the depths of the refrigerator where I found another cold Foster's. The fresh ones were excellent, but they were still superior when cold. I consumed another pain pill along with the beer in the hope that it would render me unconscious. This was successful. Friday arrived and the sentences were announced. Dirk was sentenced to a year in prison, but he will serve it in the county jail. He will be released in approximately 6 months. This would be a beneficial outcome. However, this was not the case in Dirk's instance. 2 of his accomplices were sentenced to 6 months imprisonment, minus time already served. At times, I find the rationale behind the justice system difficult to comprehend. Nevertheless, I was gratified by the outcome. Saturday was a particularly busy day, spent assisting the children in settling into their new environment. Despite their extensive packing, each child realized they had forgotten something. The afternoon trip to Walmart was a significant expense, but it was deemed necessary. By the end of the day, things had largely returned to normal. There was no noticeable absence of Noreen, as we had all become accustomed to a different routine. Upon returning home, I realized that I was running low on pain medication. Consequently, I began consuming more beer. I did not intend to operate any vehicles or heavy machinery the following morning. Instead, I was attempting to clear my thoughts when I heard Toby conversing with the children. I donned my jeans, but instead of a painkiller, I ingested 2 aspirin. I was eventually compelled to gradually reduce my intake of aspirin. My family greeted my appearance in the kitchen with a round of applause. They demonstrated minimal sympathy for my difficulties. The prevailing view was that I consumed beer because I desired to do so, not because I was compelled to. They were correct. Terry poured me a cup of hot coffee. As I took a seat at the table, the 3 children promptly dispersed, as if they intuitively understood that Toby and I required a private discussion. We had only recently begun to adjust to the new circumstances when Toby decided to present me with a novel challenge. I attempted to take a sip of my black coffee, but it was too hot. I set the mug on the table with a sigh. Toby, I would like to propose a new challenge. What is the latest problem? On Saturday morning, the guards discovered Dirk Franklin in the prison laundry room. He had been severely beaten, resulting in a fractured face, broken ribs, and other internal injuries. The medical team was unable to diagnose the extent of his injuries, as such occurrences are rare. It did not take long for him to alienate his new acquaintances. It is believed that the perpetrator was not a recent addition to the group. Toby observed me smiling as he took another sip of his morning beverage. It was still hot, but the temperature was decreasing. It was reported that someone had divulged the information that Dirk had relinquished his hired assistants in order to secure a reduction in his sentence. His accomplices received a lesser sentence than he did. They were visibly displeased by this turn of events. There is no concrete evidence that they were involved in the crime, and frankly, there is little interest in investigating the matter further. I stood up and refilled Toby's cup. He noticed that I was still smiling. This was the source of my dilemma. The coffee was excellent, but the smile. The expression on my face suddenly changed. Dirk was transferred to a hospital in Allentown, where he was under the supervision of a guard. However, he disappeared last night. The staff initially believed that he could not leave on his own, but it seems that they were mistaken. I did not finish my coffee, instead, I poured it down the sink. Toby sat in silence and I stood and gazed out the kitchen window. The view was uninspiring, limited to the brick wall of the neighboring store. Despite never feeling threatened by Dirk, I was troubled by the prospect of him being at large. After a few moments, I heard my brother. John, I will keep you apprised of developments as they occur. If I learn of any pertinent information, I will promptly inform you. I was still gazing at the brick wall when I heard the back door close. Daddy, would you like me to prepare you some scrambled eggs? That would be greatly appreciated. Terry, please allow me to take a brief shower first. The injuries healed rapidly. I was offered a position with a small company in Tamaka, which afforded me an uncomplicated commute to work. My children adapted readily to their new circumstances. We initiated a program of regular contact with Elizabeth and her son. Brian and the other appeared to establish a rapport, and I observed Terry regarding him on several occasions. However, I spent the majority of my time with Elizabeth at public events and with our families. We also began to have a few celebratory dinners and went to the movies on occasion. 2 weeks later, I requested that Toby deliver a couple packs of cigarettes to the individuals who had assaulted me. Despite the lack of prior interaction, there was an unspoken understanding between us. Toby observed that they seemed to recognize the potential consequences of their actions. If the outcome aligned with my expectations, the expenditure would be justified. The cigarettes were not inexpensive, and neither Sarah nor I received any communication from them. It was unclear whether Ian was reunited with Dirk or had otherwise departed. Then, one day, 2 of my adversaries were released from detention, and promptly 3 months later, I received notice that my divorce was finalized and that I had been awarded custody of Brian and S. Terry was no longer considered a minor, she was attending dental school and reading. Elizabeth and I began to spend more time together while all of this was going on. I still could not shake the thought that somewhere out there, nearby, Dirk Franklin was lurking. I wondered if he still harbored some grudge or had already retired from the business. I could never be sure. This was a source of considerable distress for me. I took a position with a modest, independent auto insurance company in Pottsville. 6 months later, Elizabeth and I were quietly married. The sole stipulation of our marriage was that she would retain her previous surname, Vargas. She had several reasons for this, and I could not blame her for it. Elizabeth learned that Noreen was employed and resided at the Salvation Army in downtown Philadelphia. Despite our best efforts, we never saw her again. However, she did begin sending birthday cards to the children. I began to receive cards from the children. They arrived at various times, including Flag Day, Veterans Day, and Arbor Day. Each card expressed the same sentiment, thinking of you. I showed these cards to Elizabeth, but we were unable to determine an appropriate course of action. The cards originated from various locations on the East Coast. Initially, I discarded them, but as the number of cards increased, I became increasingly concerned. Dirk Franklin represented a persistent and enigmatic presence in my life. Elizabeth was doing her utmost to maintain control of the situation. I was grateful for her assistance, but I felt powerless. The card I received approximately 2 weeks before Christmas was more sinister than the others. I have a special gift for you. See you soon, DF. Dirk had never exhibited any inclination to harm the children, but I was uncertain as to whether he still held such sentiments. I found myself frequently preoccupied with thoughts of Elizabeth and the children. He was no longer in my life, yet he continued to cause me distress. I was forced to wait and prepare for his potential reappearance. The only recourse was to wait and be prepared for his potential reappearance. 2 days before Christmas, the ordeal finally concluded. The greeting card, while unremarkable on the surface, contained a clipping from the Baltimore Sun newspaper. The body of a man identified as Dirk Franklin was discovered on that day in a burnt-out automobile near a brickyard in Glengarry. Police were unable to determine the true cause of death due to the condition of the body. The postcard was not signed, it simply stated, "Thanks for the cigarettes."